I wonder if we can go through some myths and facts about prison abolition.
Sounds good. A good, like, foundational myth that supports the idea of prisons is that there are good people and bad people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, indeed. That is the appropriate reaction to hearing complete bullshit. Let me debunk this notion using a reductio ad absurdum, a method of argumentation that demonstrates a claim's invalidity by showing that it leads to an absurd, contradictory, or logically untenable conclusion when taken to its logical extreme. If you truly believe that the concept of good and bad people is a myth, and that all people are inherently good or at least neutral, then let me ask you, was Hitler good? Was he neutral? What about Osama bin Laden, Ted Bundy, Yahya Sinwar, Joseph Stalin, Karl Marx, or Mao Zedong? Are you willing to say that not even one of these figures was objectively bad? And let's take this further. What do you think should have happened if we had captured bin Laden? Should he have gone to prison or not? Should he have been executed or set free? The prison abolitionists never give clear and straight answers to these kinds of questions. But here's the truth. If you don't think bin Laden should have been imprisoned or executed, you are dangerous and insane. You would have blood on your hands because refusing to hold evil accountable allows it to persist and harm others. But this isn't just about extreme cases. What about the everyday examples? Those who commit assaults, sex crimes, murders, armed robberies, and fraud. What exactly do you think would happen if we didn't imprison these people? Yes, they wouldn't do as much damage as bin Laden, but they would still cause significant harm. Should society simply let them walk free? Should we wait until their crimes escalate, or until more lives are destroyed? And why is it that if someone kills one person, they're often not considered evil, but if they kill thousands, they are? Why is one life not enough to recognize the presence of evil? You cheapen human life when you deny the evil of murderers. One life is worth everything to the victim and their loved ones. Saying that one life doesn't count unless it scales into the thousands is not only illogical, but morally repugnant. If your response is to excuse these actions by pointing to their childhood trauma, difficult upbringing, or psychological struggles, then where do you draw the line? If bad actions can always be justified by external factors, then does moral responsibility even exist? Can anyone ever truly be held accountable? Would it ever be justified to punish someone, or would every crime simply be dismissed as the inevitable outcome of circumstances? This perspective leads to an untenable moral position. If no one is truly bad, then no one is truly good either. If morality is reduced to a matter of mere circumstances, then the very foundation of moral judgment and goodness collapses. If everything is just circumstance, then acts of bravery, compassion, and sacrifice lose their moral value too. It becomes impossible to distinguish between true virtue and mere environmental luck. At some point, we must acknowledge reality. Some people commit such heinous acts that they cannot simply be dismissed as misguided or products of their environment. The refusal to recognize genuine evil does not make you morally enlightened. It makes you blind to reality. Furthermore, there are plenty of people who grow up in poverty and hardship yet choose to live honest, moral lives. There are others who grow up in comfortable, stable homes and still become murderers, abusers, or thieves. Why? Because ultimately, they made a choice. Evil is not always born from environment. It is often born from personal decisions. To deny this is to deny free will and moral agency, which contradicts what we see in reality. If environment were the sole factor, why do siblings from the same household often end up making completely different life choices? Why does one become a criminal while another becomes a law-abiding citizen? Because people are more than just products of their environment. They are moral agents, responsible for their actions. And to be clear, I am not saying all criminals are evil, far from it. But most of them are wicked, which is not the same as evil, which is more malicious. Evil people do exist. And denying that fact doesn't eliminate evil, it enables it. It makes you complicit in the harm that follows, because evil thrives where accountability is absent. Evil thrives where people deny the existence of evil. Any society that forgets that evil exists is doomed to destruction. Any society that does not protect its citizens from evil people is itself a wicked society that is doomed to fail. Societies that don't defend themselves from enemies, foreign and domestic, will disappear. They will simply be swallowed up by other evil nations. This is as the verse says, "Evil shall slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous shall be condemned."
Okay, that's going to throw some people off.
We are shaped by our conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So based on what's happening to me, are my needs met? Am I well resourced? Do I have space to heal from the traumas that I'm going through? All of those things. Do I have supportive relationships? Do I have access to education? All those things are going to determine how I show up in the world and what I do.
Yep.
You know what else determines what you do? Your choices. Everyone I've read on these topics, including myself, acknowledges the criminogenic influence of a person's environment. But this point usually comes up in discussions about youth crime, where environmental factors make more sense as influencing behavior. But what about a 50-year-old who chooses to go to a bar, gets drunk, and starts a fight? How exactly did poverty or childhood verbal abuse lead to that? The connection is far too weak to deny responsibility. If he could have done otherwise, and it's obvious that he could have, then he is responsible. One clear way to prove this is by considering how he would have acted if multiple police officers were sitting in that bar. He wouldn't have started a fight. That alone shows the absurdity of the "I couldn't control myself" argument. He clearly could control himself when consequences were immediate and visible. Regarding environmental influence, the great Jewish philosopher Maimonides wrote, "It is natural for a man's character and actions to be influenced by his friends and associates, and for him to follow the local norms of behavior. Therefore, he should associate with the righteous and be constantly in the company of the wise, so as to learn from their deeds. Conversely, he should keep away from the wicked who walk in darkness, so as not to learn from their deeds." This is implied by Solomon's statement, Proverbs 13:20. "He who walks with the wise will become wise, while one who associates with fools will suffer." Similarly, Psalms 1:1 states, "Happy is the man who has not followed the advice of the wicked." A person who lives in a place where the norms of behavior are evil, and the inhabitants do not follow the straight path, should move to a place where the people are righteous and follow the ways of the good. If all the places with which he is familiar and of which he hears reports follow improper paths, as in our times, or if he is unable to move to a place where the patterns of behavior are proper, because of the presence of bands of raiding troops, or for health reasons, he should remain alone in seclusion, as Ahah 3:28 states. Let him sit alone and be silent. If they are wicked and sinful, and do not allow him to reside there unless he mingle with them and follow their evil behavior, he should go out to caves, thickets, and deserts, rather than follow the paths of sinners, as Jeremiah 9:1 states, "Who will give me a lodging place for wayfarers in the desert?" Maimonides never denies that people are influenced by their surroundings, and even suggests quite extreme measures to avoid being negatively influenced. But crucially, he never denies that people are in control of their own choices, writing, "Permission is given to all men. Whether they want to incline towards a good path and be righteous, the choice is theirs. And whether they want to incline to an evil path and be wicked, the choice is theirs. This is what the Torah says. Therefore has man become as one of us to know good and evil." Genesis 3:22. Meaning, therefore has this genus called man become the sole being in the world in this aspect, that he by himself, in his mind and thought, knows good from evil, and does whatever he pleases, and nothing can stop him from doing good or evil. Therefore we are worried, lest he extend his hand to eat from the tree of life, and live forever. This shows a balanced view. While environment influences behavior, free will remains intact. People can choose to resist their environment, and they are morally responsible for the choices they make. Suggesting otherwise denies human agency and excuses behavior that people are capable of controlling. None of this is to deny the concept of mitigating and aggravating factors. Rabbi Zev Leff wrote, "Finally, as the Vilna Gaon states, God judges each individual in relation to his specific nature. Hence, a person prone to anger by nature will be judged less harshly if he succumbs to a fit of anger than a person who is by nature calm. Likewise, a person with a predisposition to anger will receive more reward for controlling his anger than a person with a calm disposition." This principle makes sense. Similarly, blame is rightly lessened when a truly struggling and desperate person with seemingly no other options commits a financial crime. We judge such cases less harshly, and rightly so. But even this logic has its limits. Financial crimes committed out of desperation are one of the few circumstances where diminished guilt makes sense. However, this does not extend to violent crimes, sex crimes, or reckless offenses like driving under the influence. There is no logical connection between being poor and choosing to drive drunk. Poverty doesn't force someone to get behind the wheel intoxicated. Nor does poverty excuse sexual assault, armed robbery, or starting a bar fight. Only in cases of nonviolent financial offenses can extreme poverty be a factor that lessens guilt. Even then, the judge must carefully assess whether prison or another punishment would be more appropriate. But prison abolitionists take the logic of mitigating factors and stretch it to absurdity, applying it to virtually every crime even when there is no link. Murder. Well, his father spanked him, so he's not responsible. Sex crimes. Maybe he was abused as a child. Even if he doesn't remember, maybe he just forgot. Drunk driving. Perhaps he wasn't properly educated on its dangers. Starting a bar fight. He was bullied in high school, so it's understandable. Drug manufacturing. He was fired from his job. What else could he have done? Find a new job? Preposterous. Reckless driving causing death. Well, if we took money from the prison system and put it into social services, he wouldn't have driven 100 over the speed limit. Domestic abuse. Something. Systemic racism, sexism, patriarchy. He's not really bad, just brainwashed by society. See how patriarchy harms both men and women? Female genital mutilation. You cannot judge other cultures, you bigot. How you expect them to know any better? Obviously that's a bit satirical, but you get the idea. It's a constant cycle of diminishing evil, constantly diminishing wickedness, violence, and danger, constantly excusing the inexcusable. Do you know the insufferable conditions Maimonides lived under? Do you know the persecution Jews faced throughout history? Did that make them turn to violent crime? Did medieval Jews respond to persecution and poverty by committing murder and rape? No. So stop with the nonsense excuses. There was so little violent crime among Jews that Christians had to invent fake crimes against us, namely, the blood libel. Maimonides wrote in his letter to Yemen, "Remember, my co-religionists, that on account of the vast number of our sins, God has hurled us in the midst of this people, the Arabs, who have persecuted us severely, and passed baneful and discriminatory legislation against us, as Scripture has forewarned us. Our enemies themselves shall judge us." Deuteronomy 32:31. Never did a nation molest, degrade, debase, and hate us as much as they. Therefore, when David, of blessed memory, inspired by the Holy Spirit, envisaged the future tribulations of Israel, he bewailed and lamented their lot only in the kingdom of Ishmael, and prayed in their behalf for their deliverance, as is implied in the verse, "Woe is me, that I sojourn with Meshech, that I dwell beside the tents of Kedar." Psalms 125. Note the distinction between Kedar and the children of Ishmael, for the madman and imbecile is of the lineage of the children of Kedar, as they readily admit. Daniel alludes only to our humiliation and degradation. Like the dust in threshing, suffered at the hands of the Arabs, may they speedily be vanquished, when he says, "And some of the host and of the stars it cast down to the ground, and trampled upon them." 8:10. Although we were dishonored by them beyond human endurance, and had to put with their fabrications, yet we behaved like him who is depicted by the inspired writer. "But I am as a deaf man, I hear not, and I am as a dumb man that openeth not his mouth." Psalms 38:14. Similarly, our sages instructed us to bear the prevarications and preposterousness of Ishmael in silence. They found a cryptic allusion for this attitude in the names of his sons, Mishma, Duma, and Massa, Genesis 25:14, which was interpreted to mean, "Listen, be silent, and endure." Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, ad locum. We have acquiesced, both old and young, to inure ourselves to humiliation, as Isaiah instructed us, "I gave my back to the smiters, and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair." 56. All this notwithstanding, we do not escape this continued maltreatment, which well nigh crushes us. No matter how much we suffer and elect to remain at peace with them, they stir up strife and sedition, as David predicted, "I am all peace, but when I speak, they are for war." Psalms 127. If therefore we start trouble and claim power from them absurdly and preposterously, we certainly give ourselves up to destruction. The only crime where extreme circumstances can offer some level of explanation, not justification, is nonviolent financial crime driven by desperation. Even then, it's still wrong, but at least it's understandable. But don't commit the composition fallacy. Just because some crimes can be partly explained, that doesn't mean all crimes can be excused. Not all wrongdoings are equal, not all choices are forced, and not all evil can be blamed on circumstances. Some acts are simply evil, and some people are simply responsible.
The myth of good people, bad people is what helps us accept the prison in our minds.
Oof.
Right? That's where that comes from.
Yeah.
But what was the prison founded on? I think that's different.
Yeah.
And one intervention that PIC abolitionists make is actually not that the criminal legal system is broken, but it's functioning exactly as it was designed.
This girl is evidence white supremacy is false, and her overdramatic fake reactions are insufferable. What helps us accept the necessity of prisons is primarily the incapacitation theory of crime. The core idea is simple. If someone is locked away, they cannot harm others. Incapacitation is the most straightforward and effective way to protect society from dangerous individuals. No complex theories, no guesswork, just the basic fact that a criminal who is in prison cannot commit crimes against the public. This is the main reason why prisons are necessary. Alongside incapacitation, prisons serve the purpose of both general and specific deterrence. General deterrence is about sending a message to society. If you commit this crime, you will face punishment. The existence of prisons discourages potential offenders from committing crimes in the first place. Specific deterrence focuses on the individual offender. Once punished, the offender should be discouraged from reoffending, knowing the consequences firsthand. These concepts aren't abstract theories. They are real and observable. We literally see how this plays out in real time. Just look at what happens when offenders are released on bail. Many of them go straight back to crime. This is not an exaggeration. Courts and police officers frequently witness offenders committing the same crimes while out on bail. Some even escalate their behavior, thinking they can get away with it again. And here's the obvious point. That wouldn't happen if they were in prison. The crime they committed while out on bail would not have occurred if they were already behind bars, incapacitated, and unable to harm others. This is why the claim that prisons are unnecessary or inherently wrong collapses under real-world observation. When offenders are not incapacitated, crime continues. When they are, crime stops, at least for the duration of their incarceration. The system isn't perfect, but it's far better than the alternative. It's naive and dangerous to suggest that prisons can be abolished or replaced entirely by social services. While poverty and environment can influence behavior, they do not remove personal responsibility, nor do they eliminate the need for public safety. Some people, by their choices, have shown that they are a danger to society, and if they cannot or will not restrain themselves, society has every right and duty to restrain them. This is about protection, protecting innocent people from harm. Prisons exist first and foremost to ensure that those who pose a threat cannot continue to harm others. And as real-world bail cases show, when that protection is absent, the consequences are immediate and severe.
A lot of things that get identified as crimes are sort of crimes of survival.
Yeah.
And then, but I do want to name that there's also real harm that occurs where people commit assaults or murder, and those types of things I think still is based on our condition.
How we understand crimes of survival depends largely on how we define them. While it's true that most individuals who commit theft aren't literally on the brink of starvation, many do face real hunger, housing insecurity, or financial desperation. Even among the homeless, full-blown starvation is rare in developed countries, but food instability and chronic deprivation are widespread realities. For many low-level offenses, such as shoplifting and petty theft, the motivation often stems not from malice, but from desperation. In such cases, it should be left to the discretion of judges to determine whether incarceration is truly necessary. For a first-time non-violent offender who steals $100 worth of goods, prison is often a disproportionate response. A more appropriate and constructive penalty could be restitution, for example, requiring the offender to pay back double the amount taken. This not only compensates the victim, but also reinforces responsibility without the long-term harm of incarceration, such as trauma, stigma, or future unemployability. But it depends on the individual circumstances of the case. Obviously, this would not apply in all cases. But here's the deeper issue. Are these really the offenders that defenders of prisons are worried about? Are nonviolent poor criminals really the reason we advocate so strongly for the necessity of prisons? Of course not. The concern lies with violent and dangerous offenders, repeat criminals, and those who appear to have made a career out of harming others. These are the individuals whose actions genuinely endanger society, and whose imprisonment or death penalty is often necessary for public safety and justice. If prison abolitionists are primarily motivated by the mistreatment of nonviolent offenders, then their energy would be better spent advocating for alternative sentencing, such as fines, mandatory restitution, house arrest, or community service, rather than calling for the complete dismantling of the prison system. And if you don't believe in the complete dismantling of prisons, don't call yourself an abolitionist. To repeatedly cite cases of minor theft or drug possession as the reason for abolishing prisons is deeply misleading. It creates the false impression that the prison population is made up of misunderstood, harmless individuals, when in reality, a significant portion are incarcerated for serious, violent, or repeat crimes. Let's fix what's broken, change what isn't helping, and not destroy the entire structure.
I guarantee if you even go inside a prison and talk to someone about how they ended up there, there's some story that it's like, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know?
So what? The criminal gave you a sob story, and you just swallowed it whole. Just because someone explains how they ended up in prison, and their story sounds reasonable, doesn't mean they don't belong there. You can understand their background without excusing their behavior. If you're a danger to society, you need to be locked up. It doesn't matter if you had a rough childhood, grew up in poverty, or made understandable choices. We are not going to let someone keep hurting innocent people just because their life has been difficult. That might explain how they got there, but it doesn't usually excuse what they've done. Even if the system failed them, even if they never had a fair shot, the rest of us have a right to live safely. The protection of the community comes first. We don't imprison people out of spite. We do it to stop them from causing more damage. If someone keeps committing crimes, we're not going to sit around debating whether it's really their fault. The cold, hard truth is, if you're a threat, you're going away. And to be clear, I am not saying all violent crimes automatically deserve prison, and all violent offenses are equally bad. No one is saying that. The main point is that society needs protection from dangerous people, and prison is the most effective method we have. Society also needs deterrence, and again, some form of penalty, whether it's fines or prison, are the most effective methods.
Well, and who wouldn't, in a desperate situation, do something that we call a crime?
Sure.
Like, if you are starving, you will make different choices to survive.
Yeah, it's called getting a job. Or if that's not possible, applying for welfare, which exists in most developed countries. And if that's still not an option, there are literally thousands of charities, shelters, and food programs ready to help. Even people who are homeless, broke, and addicted to drugs aren't starving to death in the developed world. That's not how things work anymore. So when someone tries to frame it as if the only option is theft to avoid starvation, it's just dishonest. It completely ignores the countless safety nets that exist. This idea that stealing food is the only path left, and that's why people end up in prison, so we should abolish prisons altogether, is nonsense. The entire framing is not in line with reality.
I think that the whole prison industrial complex is built on the idea of, like, there are people who want to do harm for joy.
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
I mean, I think it's going back to that good people, bad people myth.
Yeah.
Think about all the Batman movies and, whatever else we're fed, and different ways that we kind of reassure ourselves that we are good is by having an example of the opposite, whether that example is kind of a boogeyman that we've created, or just not having proximity to these types of issues. So I can easily say, well, I'd never do that. Well, you've never been in those conditions.
Right.
Let's see what happens when you are in those conditions.
Actually, there are plenty of people who enjoy doing harm. We even have names for them: sadists, psychopaths, and some revenge or ideologically driven violent offenders. These aren't abstract ideas. They exist, and many of them are in prison for a reason. If you really believe most prisoners aren't dangerous, here's a simple thought experiment. How about you spend a night in a prison without guards, and we announce to the inmates that they'll face no consequences no matter what they do? According to your logic, if these are just misunderstood people in for desperate acts of theft, you should feel perfectly safe. Would you send young women into a male prison under those same conditions? Would you send your children there too? Would you feel comfortable without protection, knowing that, as you seem to think, these are just harmless victims of poverty? And while we're at it, if the prison population is so gentle and reasonable, why do corrections officers receive extensive training in self-defense, riot control, and tactical response? What are they preparing for if they're just managing a bunch of low-level shoplifters? Also, you can't have it both ways. You can't claim prison is traumatizing, violent, and criminogenic, and at the same time argue that prisoners are not dangerous. If the people inside are so kind and peaceful, then prison should be the safest place on earth, just forced housing for poor people. Yet we all know that's not the case. And how often do we hear the argument that we shouldn't send people to prison because they will learn to commit even more crime there? But who are they learning from if prison is filled with just poor, desperate people who don't want to commit crimes? In reality, prisons contain a mix of people, including nonviolent people, and also some of the most dangerous individuals in society. But if you truly believe they're all victims and basically harmless, go prove it. Enter with no guards, promise them no more punishment, and try your luck. Maybe start by insulting the biggest guy in the room. I'm sure nothing bad will happen. After all, as you imply, they're just misunderstood and struggling to get by. No shanks, no assaults, no threats. Just warmth and compassion, right? And as for the claim that since I wasn't in that desperate circumstance, so I cannot judge, it falls apart. Plenty of people face poverty and hardship without turning to crime, so I use them as an example that not turning to crime is possible. In fact, the vast majority of poor individuals don't go around robbing others or harming society. They struggle, but they maintain their integrity. If poverty automatically led to crime, we'd see entire low-income communities filled with criminals. But we don't. Most poor people are law-abiding, decent human beings. So let's stop pretending that hardship erases responsibility, or that it justifies tearing down the entire prison system. Anyway, virtually no one is saying all thieves should automatically receive prison time. Every argument for prison abolition crumbles under basic scrutiny. It's time to stop entertaining this nonsense and start having real conversations about justice, safety, and accountability. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you.